Hey, John Steen here from Queen City Clay. Let's get going with centering, starting to make some fun work on the wheel. Okay, so I'm going to take my wedged ball of clay, make sure it's nice and round, as smooth as possible, so I have less inconsistency that I'm going to have to take out of it to make a symmetrical pot. I'm going to aim for a bullseye, hammer it down with some force. And if I didn't get a perfect bullseye, I can see I'm off a little bit here, I want to grab it and twist and wiggle it as close as I can into the middle. That twisting action helps to make sure it's stuck. Then I'm going to get my wheel at a nice medium fast speed and set my cruise control. Just lift that leg right off of the pedal and push that pedal aside. Okay, the first thing we need to do, whether you're making a cylinder, bowl, or a plate, is get this clay spinning perfectly in the center. And to do that, you want to sit as close as possible to the wheel. Take that left hand and create a capital L shape, similar to what we were doing with wedging. And I'm going to take my left elbow and lock it into my hip. This lets me use my body weight and lean into the clay. I'm going to put some water on my clay in the vat. I need to make sure that it's always sliding, so there's not a whole lot of friction. Don't want our hands catching fire or anything like that. This portion of my hand is going to do most of the work. I'm going to add some water and I'm going to lean forward into this clay with my body weight. You can see I can get it to shoot up taller. When that starts to happen, I'm going to take my right hand and I'm going to slide down right over that left hand, and I want my pinky knuckle crossing the very, very center point here. So because the wheel's spinning, I don't need to touch the clay all the way in the front. I'm just worried about the center point back towards me. So you can see what happens when I drop my wrist there. Finding that kind of 45-degree angle. It's going to be right in front of my body though. So I'm going to lean forward, get that clay to shoot up, and then hold still. I'm not going to continually add pressure. I'm just going to lock this arm. With my right hand, I'm going to karate chop, and I'm going to lean over my left hand for support. So my thumb wraps over that hand, like so. Pinky knuckles crossing the center. And I'm looking for that nice kind of 45-ish degree angle, okay? When I feel like it's calming down, I'm going to let go very, very slowly. So what we're looking for is a ball of clay that's spinning perfectly in the middle, where if I touch in one place, I can make a mark all the way around. If I don't quite have that yet, I need to go through those steps again and make sure I'm letting go slowly. Because if you're doing everything right, maybe you're leaning the clay a little bit. So it's kind of in a wave leaning away from me. And if I let go quickly, you can see that last place that I touched clay. So everything we do, we want to do with intent. I'm going to lock that elbow. That lets me use my body weight. My elbow's out in space. When I push in, the clay pushes back. You might think this is only a couple pounds of clay, but the wheel is a pretty powerful tool, and it can just push my arm all over the place, but not my body. So if I lock that elbow, you can see I instantly get control. I'm pushing straight forward. If this were a clock face, I'd be at about 6 o'clock right now, using this part of my left hand, and I'm using the part nearest my thumb to really drop down and start to round the top. So that way my right hand can karate chop and wrap around. That right elbow is going to lock in too. I'm going to hold still and let go slowly. The other thing you want to avoid is making a mushroom. Okay, you can see the widest point right now is down here at the bottom, and this all leans in the entire way. If I'm cupping that left hand or using my ring finger, pinky finger a little bit too much, I'll end up getting this kind of mushroom shape. You can see that shadow being cast down there. That's not going to set me up for making a strong cylinder. So instead, I want to make sure that my left hand's driving forward and down, and it's really the top of that left hand doing the work. Right hand karate chops, but it karate chops like a sloth in slow motion. Okay, so you're not going to do anything like that. It's slow and methodical. And that left hand's no longer pushing, it's just giving my right hand something to hold on to. When everything feels calm, I'm going to let go slowly. Give that a shot. If you're watching this for review, just before you come in and practice or start your day of work in the studio, that's great. But if you're following along to really learn these steps and you haven't centered yet, go ahead and pause here and go ahead and center a piece of clay. Then come back and we'll talk about opening. But for you guys moving right through, or if you've already centered, next thing I need to do is open up this ball of clay. So my left hand is still in that exact same centering position. I've got that 90-degree bend. My elbow's locked down at my hip, my ribs I'm leaning forward with my body. I'm not really applying pressure into the clay right now. This is just a really stable platform for my right hand. So with my right hand, I'm going to take that thumb and kick it out about 90 degrees again, and it's going to hold on to my left wrist. So that's my connection point, right? My middle finger is what I'm going to use to open up this lump of clay. And I've got my index and ring finger just kind of next to it for support, making it a little bit stronger. They're actually stacked a little bit higher. See how that's kind of a V shape? I'm going to drive on down. It's important that I keep a low angle with my right wrist. And I'm doing that by keeping my elbow locked so that arm's low, and by keeping those fingers nice and straight. If I start to do something like this, where it gets really vertical, you can see that straight up and down, I will lose center almost immediately. Instead, it's a low angle kind of like that, and I'm using my entire middle finger to open up this clay. Sliding down. I don't want to go all the way through the clay. I want to create this nice narrow V shape all the way down until I feel like there's about 1/4 inch of extra clay. When I feel like I'm getting close, I'll stop. Take any kind of needle tool you might have. This is one of the 2-in-1 needle tool wood tools. But I'm going to take my index finger and my dominant hand, and I'm going to touch down near the needle tip. I'm going to stab through the clay down to the bat and slide my index finger down until it touches clay. And I'm going to freeze it right there. So that'll show me how thick my floor is, and that's about right. Kind of a heavy 1/4 inch, because I'll lose a little bit when I wire it and be right where I want to be. When we talk about bowls, we might be closer to 1/2 inch, so that way we can trim a nice foot ring down on the bottom. But now I need to make this a little bit wider. So my left hand's still in that exact same position. I'm not applying any force forward. It's just there to give my right hand a stable platform, okay? And all I'm going to do is to put those fingers down on the inside again, my right middle finger backed up by my first and third finger, and I'm going to slowly change the angle here from that soft kind of 30-45 degree angle to be a more vertical 90-degree angle, and then I'll continue to undercut a little bit further. The key with this action is to go very, very slow. So originally it's just my middle finger engaging the clay. As I pull back, the tip of that middle finger, so you can see where the slip is gathering and coming up, kind of that first pad. I'll come back a little bit further. And right now I'm deciding how wide I want this piece of clay to be. The opening here should not change through the whole rest of the process of making a pot. So if it's about 3 inches wide, then my pot's going to be about 3 inches wide plus the thickness of my wall. So if it's 1/4 inch on either side, it'll be about 3.5. So that might be a nice mug. If I continue opening, I could get to a point where the widest part of my clay is no longer at the bottom. And that's going to create a really weak wall for when I do the next step and try to thin it. So we always want to make sure that our wall is leaning in like a volcano. So if it gets a little bit too wide, or if you just want to give this a shot because it's a lot of fun, I'm going to wrap my hands all the way around the clay. And because the walls are still thick, I can use a lot of my hand as long as it's wet. And I'm going to squeeze with even pressure all the way around and lean the top of my hands in. And I'll hold still, which is the important part, and let go slowly. So now I have that volcano shape where it's widest at the bottom and leaning in the entire time. So I have a pot. It's just kind of a heavy, thick, frumpy pot. So the next thing we need to do is make it taller and thinner, and pause here, get through opening, then we'll talk through pulling. So before I pull, I want to make sure that my floor is nice and strong. So I'm going to take one of these yellow sponges, small throwing sponge, wad it up nice and tight. It's damp, but doesn't have a lot of water. And I'm going to hold on to my right wrist with my left hand. Left arm still braced, so I'm in control. I can really control this hand. And I'm going to wad that sponge up, press down in the center, and slowly move out to the right. If I touch left of center, the clay is going to grab my hand every single time. We always need the clay leaving what we're touching. So I'm going to touch down in the center and move to the right. This gets rid of the marks from your fingers, and it helps arrange those clay particles so they all lay flat, and you're less likely to get cracks when the piece dries and in firing. Now that the floor is compressed, I can think about pulling a wall. So to do that, to thin this out, I'm going to take my right thumb and put it right on that first digit line of my middle two fingers of my right hand. So it looks something like that. We call this the rock and roll llama. See, there's the rock and roll, there's the llama. My right elbow is going to lock down right by my hip and my rib cage, and I'm going to relax my wrist and just drop those fingers. So if we're thinking about a clock face again, where 12 is directly in front of you and 6 is in front of you on the closer side of the wheel, you want to be touching the clay at about 3 o'clock, so the very right side. I'm going to add a little water so everything can slide. My left hand, I'm going to take my thumb, reach over to the outside, and it's going to sit right on top of those fingers of my right hand. Something like that. So you can see my thumbnails are touching. The left thumbnail is just a little bit higher. Maybe your fingernail can kind of grab that cuticle right there, and that way my fingers are right across from each other. It's my right fingertips as well as this left thumb that are going to squeeze on the clay. The left fingertips on the inside are protecting that opening and making sure that it doesn't shrink. Okay? And one thing you might try is just taking a sponge, getting a little bit of water in it, come down and squeeze a little bit of water out and lift straight up, and then let go. Do that a couple of times. Nice and slow and steady. That'll get you ready for a pull, because with that pull I'm going to come down to the bottom. Middle fingers on my right hand along with that left thumb are going to give a little bit of a squeeze. You can see that shadow forming right there. As soon as I've made that area thinner than the area above it, I'm going to slide up and squeeze on the thicker clay. And I'm going to continue doing that all the way up to the rim. And that rim shoots above my fingers a little bit too while I'm pulling it. And I don't want to quit early. I want to make sure that I get that rim to the final thickness that I want this pot to be. So in this case, about 1/4 of an inch, coming all the way up, and then I'm going to let go to the side. You can see the rings from my pull, from my fingers moving up, are nice and tight because I touched every little piece of clay. If you come up too quickly, you put in a spiral, which is kind of fun. We can use that for decorating. But if you're squeezing while you do it, if you do it too early, you can create some real weak points. So we don't want to do that. We want to come up nice and slow. At this point, about this much of my cylinder from here up is finished. It's about the thickness that I want, but the bottom is still thick. So every single time I'm going to reach down, and it's my right thumb down by those middle two fingers. My wrist is relaxed, so the fingers are pointed slightly away from me, kind of a nice 45-ish degree angle. I'm going to drive in, and you can see this ring of clay forming. My job is to try to squeeze directly on top of that ring of clay and slowly continue moving up, staying on top of it the entire time. Now, as I get into the higher part of my wall where it's already the thickness that I want, my left hand is going to back off, resisting that squeeze, and my right hand continues to drive in a little bit. Because the wheel's spinning, everything wants to open up and become a planter or a bowl shape. So I want to make sure my right hand is doing the majority of the pull, the majority of the force is coming from those fingertips at this point in the process to keep everything leaning in. That's making a strong pot. And if it gets in a little bit too tight, as long as my hand's wet and I go in slow, it's going to open up for me. So I'm going to come down to the bottom again. My thumbs are connected. That's how my hands can talk to each other, so that way my fingers stay right across from each other and they don't slide apart. Elbows nice and low, wrist relaxed. I'm going to drive in, get on top of the clay. And on this pass, my wall is finished a little bit lower. It's already the thickness that I want here from those additional pulls. So I'm just going to slide up nice and slow. That right hand making sure that everything narrows slightly. We always finish even when we're not pulling. We always finish that pass even when we're not squeezing, because if there's something strange going on, just passing through our fingers can help calm the clay down. Okay, we have not yet perfected transparent clay technology. So until we do, I want to cut this guy in half so we can see what's going on. So I'm just going to take a wire, cut all the way down to the floor, get rid of this front half. You can see the top part of my cylinder here is nice and thin, but the bottom still has some extra clay. So if this was still in one part and spinning on the wheel, I'd say that I'm not done. I'd still have some pulls to do. But I want to show you kind of what each hand's doing and kind of the mechanics of doing a pull. So For as long as possible, I'm going to connect my hands. At a certain point, you'll be making pots tall enough that you won't be able to do that. But while you can, it's always a good habit. So I've got my middle two fingers on my left hand, right where my floor and wall meet, and they're protecting this space. You can see it's still straight up and down, looking pretty good. If they weren't there, I could drive in and just shrink this entire opening smaller and smaller. So their job is to protect. I've got my right thumb down by my middle two fingers on my right hand, and I'm going to drive in right at the bat, right at the wheel head. Grab a little bit of clay, get on top of that clay, and both hands then move together nice and slowly all the way up to the wall where it's already thin. My left hand backs off of the pressure. It still stays in there. It's just not resisting. I come up to the rim and let go to the side. And you can see that gave me a little bit of height. So I'm going to do that one more time. Squeeze in down at the bottom. Get that bead of clay. Get on top of it. Slide up nice and slow. Left hand backs off of the resist where the wall is already the thickness you want. Get to the rim and let go slow. Okay, so I have a cylinder throne that I'm really happy with. It has an even wall thickness all the way from the bottom to the top. That's about the same thickness as my floor. So that's kind of our goal with practicing cylinders. But now I want to clean it up. I want to make something that would look nice, glazed, and have a nice finished surface. So we're going to do the majority of that work with this metal rib. And these flexible metal ribs are great. When they're brand new with your kit, they are sharp. So you want to be careful about pulling the slip off, sliding your hand over one of these edges. Over time, they get a little duller like mine is here. But brand new, they are kind of vicious. I'm going to hold it with all four fingers on one side and my thumb in the middle and the back, like so. So I can get a little bit of a flex going there, a little bit of a curve. And I want my angle to be somewhere between 45 degrees and 90 degrees to the clay. If I'm too flat, the pot grabs my rib and it spins around like that. Almost never happens during a demo when I want it to, so pretty excited. If it's too sharp, it's going to bounce. I don't know how well that's coming through, but it's going to bounce and kind of chatter and cause some marks. So somewhere in between 45 and 90 degrees, that's going to be the sweet spot you want to find. Now I'm bringing the rib around so the camera can see it a little bit better and you can see it watching at home, but I want to be holding the rib somewhere back here on the right side between kind of 3 and 4 o'clock if we're thinking about the wheel as a clock face. If I'm using this flat side of the rib, I can get a little bit closer to the bottom, which I like, but as I move up, it can put in lines from dragging this corner. To avoid that, I'm going to turn the top of my rib slightly away from me. That makes it so it's a smaller portion of the physical rib in contact with the clay. And those marks disappear. Okay, so now that I'm pretty comfortable holding the rib, I want to think about how we're actually going to use it. So on the inside, it's still my left middle two fingers that are going to be directly across from the rib. So I'm going to go all the way down, set that rib just shy of 90 degrees, top leaning away from me, and my middle fingers on the inside are going to come down and gently press out against the rib and move up very, very slowly, much slower than doing a pull. The other big difference between this action right now and doing a pull is when we're pulling from the very beginning, both hands are moving up together. But right now what's going on is I am bringing the clay to the rib, starting at the very bottom and slowly working my way up. And only when both hands move together, only the big difference between doing a pull and using a rib is that when we're pulling, both hands come down, you make your squeeze, and they move up together. But when you're using a rib, you're going to start at the bottom, bring the clay to the rib, and your left hand gets a bit of a head start. It's going to come all the way up to the top before the two are actually moving together. So that takes a little bit of getting used to. So that's where I left off. I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom again, bring the clay all the way up to the top of the rib. Then the two move as one up to the rim. And as soon as I can, bring that left thumb around to connect and help keep my hands right where I want them, I'm going to do that. So I'm going to freeze right here and gently let go to the side, show you how my hands ended up, right like that. So I come all the way up, connect, finish, and let go to the side. And with pulling, it's the right hand, it's the outside hand doing all the work, pushing in, getting that clay to move. At this point, it's my left hand bringing clay to the rib's not pushing back. If you push with the rib, your pot will wobble. The rib's just holding its ground and giving kind of a solid surface that my left hand can scrape against. The way that I can maintain that solid surface, the way that I can hold my ground, is by giving it a little bit of a bend, flexing it. The other things I want to think about are the rim. So if I just stop with a flat rim, kind of looks like I cut a taller cylinder, just removed part of it. It's almost like having a sentence and not putting a punctuation mark in the end. So we want to think about maybe what this might be used for. If it's going to be a vase, I could flare it out a little bit. But if it's going to be a drinking vessel, that would not be ideal. So I might want to soften it and make it comfortable to drink out of. But no matter what you're thinking of using it for and how you want to finish it, the way you're going to go about manipulating the rim is taking your left thumb and middle two fingers, lock your left elbow. I'm going to reach over to the right side here to 3 o'clock. I'm just going to gently hold on with a nice relaxed wrist. So my fingers are right like this with the rim moving in between them. Then I can take my finger or my sponge, wrap it right over that rim and soften it. If there's anything weird going on, if you have a little bit of an inconsistency, this is how you're going to compress that rim. So here's talk about compressing the rim. Left thumb, middle two fingers. They've got to be wet so that way the clay can slide through them. They're pointed away from me. And a little bit of downward pressure. The last thing we want to think about is the bottom here. You can see right now it looks like this pot is kind of growing out of the wheel. So you've got a couple of options. You have those wooden tools, cutback tools. This is a hybrid needle tool and wood tool. And you have these wooden ribs. When you're getting started, these wooden ribs are great. They have this pointed edge. That's what you want to face towards the pot. And you're going to hold on to the top of the wooden rib with both hands. Got all my fingers on one side, thumbs on the other. And I'm going to relax my wrists and lean it back towards me. Now I can take this point and drive straight in at the bottom of the pot and hold still. Gives me this nice finished edge, a little bit of a pedestal that I can just touch with my sponge to soften up. While you're learning to throw, you're also going to be learning how to glaze and decorate your pots. And what this ledge does gives me a place to stop my glaze. So if it runs a little bit in the kiln, I don't ruin my work and I don't damage the kiln. So now, I'm going to stop the wheel, take my wire, and I'm going to reach all the way out to the ends, wrap it around my fingers, and hold it with my thumbs. That's important so that way you're not just cutting the circulation with your fingers. I'm going to start in front of me and keeping that wire tight, pull back towards me. I don't want it to get some slack and move up, or I'll remove part of the bottom of the pot. So I'm going to pull back kind of a quick motion. And now I have some options. You can lift the bat off and leave the piece on the bat, but because I did all that work and cleaned all of the slip off of the surface, this pot's pretty strong now. So I can take my clean palms, clean dry palms, gently rest them around the pot, and I'll use my pinkies down on the bat to kind of leverage and lift this piece off. And I can just set it onto a wear board or a table. But you can see it's still round and I'm not leaving any marks. And that's because I got all the slip off of the clay with that metal rib. So my palms are doing the work here, not my fingers. That way the tiny bit of pressure is spread out kind of like a snowshoe. And I'm ready to make another pot. You can leave this little bit of clay. That's actually going to help the next ball of clay stick. As long as it stays dry, it's perfectly fine.